Would you like to give us a short opening statement and then we can go to some questions?
If I could, thanks so much.
Thank you.
In the 20 years that I've been a photographer for News Corp, I've worked on the national, the state, the regional and the community mastheads. I was one of 5 women in a team of 30 photographers at the headquarters in Sydney in the 90s, where we used film and hand-printed photos in the darkroom. In 1995, I was transferred to the Cairns Bureau and worked throughout Cape York, hand-processing film and sending photos remotely. Technology's changed so much that in 2020, I live-streamed the Prime Minister using only my mobile phone. The issues that I'd like to address today are the portrayal and the treatment of women by News Corp and the toxic work culture that's a result of the lack of media diversity. When I was employed by the Sunday Mail in 2011 to do social photos, I was told by the acting picture editor that they did not want any photos of, quote, pigs in lipstick. I found this was extremely derogatory to women, but to keep my job, I had to apply this test, which meant that women who were overweight or over 35 did not get a run in the paper. When I was employed at the Cairns Post, I was encouraged to take photos of attractive women with instructions like, get a photo of a yummy mummy, or get a photo of a pretty backpacker. I was never, ever directed to get a photo of an attractive man. I was told that the photo of an attractive woman would get a better run in the paper. I felt uncomfortable doing this, as I thought it was sexist. Even the selection of which court stories to cover is now based on applying the subscriber page view model at News Corp. Former colleagues have told me that they are told to ignore the charges and instead look out for attractive women appearing in court. They check their social media following and lift their photos off Facebook. If the women are attractive and have more than 1,000 followers, then it is much more likely that they will run the story online as it'll get more page views. I'd like to address the issue of toxic workplace. I believe that the lack of diversity in media ownership has created a toxic workplace where print journalists either accept the conditions or move out of the industry. When I returned to work at News Corp in 2011, after having children, I took a huge pay cut from a grade 6 to a grade 2A, and I remained on that low wage for the next 8.5 years. In the EBA, the 2A is for photographers who have completed training and are gaining experience. I had 10 years of experience on metro dailies. My male colleagues with less experience were on higher wages. I believe I was discriminated against as I was a woman who had left the workforce to have children, and that this is part of the toxic company culture which promotes men over women. When the current editor started in 2015, the ratio of male-female photographers and journalists was 50-50. In mid-2020, there was 1 female staff member in that team and 12 men. I believe it is now 3 women and 15 men. By 2019, 15 in total. By 2019, the conditions had deteriorated so much that for months we had to use toilet paper instead of paper towels to dry our hands in the tea room. And there were weeks when there were no notebooks or even pens provided. The company also failed to provide me with any safety equipment or training for bushfires or cyclones. They had boots and gear for the men, but I was not provided with any. Despite this, I was asked to sign off that I had received training and understood the risks of covering dangerous assignments, including bushfires and cyclones. I feel the company handled the death of 2 colleagues with very little regard to the welfare of staff who were their friends for many years. Instead of being told of their death in person, in a safe environment, I heard of one colleague's death over the scanner, and this was despite the fact that my managers had known about her death for hours. The following year, when a colleague committed suicide, my manager called me while I was covering the Premier's press conference. After that, they put up "Are you OK" posters in the office. However, in 2019, when 3 colleagues told me they were not OK, I asked for advice from my manager. He told me that he'd once worked on a newspaper where 4 people had committed suicide, and he did not offer me any advice. In mid-2019, the company introduced subscription targets, and we were all very stressed about this. At the same time, they put up black A4 posters in the office which said, "Who's next?" The fine print did say that it was an ad campaign, but from your desk, all you could read was, "Who's next?" I believe this was in very poor taste in a small office of 20, where 2 had died and 2 to 3 people were being made redundant every 6 months. In 2020, when the office was closed during COVID, all the staff, except for the photographers, were directed to work from home. Photographers would still have to go out on jobs and work from their home or car. When I asked if I could use the office toilet instead of public toilets during COVID, I was told yes, this would be okay, but I'd have to clean the toilet myself. COVID protocols were put in place, which stated that staff should be provided with PPE, masks, hand sanitizer and wipes. However, the only PPE that I was ever provided with was a single mask. I was made redundant, along with hundreds of other journalists and photographers, or journalists probably, in June 2020. When that occurred, the company classified me as clerical staff. This meant that I would be paid $20,000 less than I was entitled to. The Journalists' Union intervened, and I was paid the correct amount. I believe the lack of competition and emphasis on clickbait has created a toxic culture where staff feel intimidated and bullied, and many are just waiting for the next axe to fall and wondering if they will still have a job. Women are treated particularly badly and are paid less purely because they are women. One of the main functions of newspapers has always been to report on a community's births, deaths, marriages, and to cover public interest journalism. The lack of media diversity, when News Corp bought, then closed, more than 100 mastheads, has meant that many communities are left without that news, except on social media. And while Mr Murdoch, who's in his 90s, may be computer savvy and across social media, I'm not sure that many of his peers are so lucky. On July the 24th, 2019, the Cairns Post managing editor sent an email to all editorial staff stating that, quote, "As you can imagine, I get forensically analysed, that's not a spelling mistake, about our subscription targets. If the managing editor tells staff that he's being forensically analysed, how do you think they're treating the rest of the staff?" In summary, I believe the lack of diversity of media ownership has allowed News Corp to descend from being a reputable news organisation with a safe and supportive workplace that published public interest journalism to a place where women are considered as pigs in lipstick, with a toxic work culture where even the managing editor feels that he's being forensically analysed. And that's my experience. I can't speak for other organisations or papers, but...
Thank you, Ms Rogers, and thank you for outlining your experience.
I have provided, some documents with which refer to the points that I spoke to.
Yes, thank you. We've got that. Which we'll just, you're asking to have this tabled?
Yes, please.
Senator Carr, can you just have a...
Thank you very much for your submission and those quite graphic descriptions. What's your current, can you, for the Hansard record, can you explain what your current status is with News Corp?
I was made redundant in June, so I no longer work for News Corp.
Mm-hmm. And have you worked for any other news organisations?
I've worked for John B. Fairfax in Hunter Valley, but predominantly I've worked for Murdoch.
Thank you. So with that in mind, you've got, 30 years experience all up in photojournalism?
Closer to 25, probably.
All right, 25. So would you say that your experience is just restricted to News Corp, or would you suggest that it's a problem more generally?
I can only speak to my experience. I
Yes.
can say that I've now left News Corp and I'm working as a communications agent in a private company, and the work atmosphere is, I didn't know it was possible to work in such a supportive and positive environment. So I can only speak from my experience.
Mm-hmm. And that's in a private company working, in terms of your trade though, as a photojournalist or a photographer.
Yes.
And is it, was it your experience working for what was once known as Fairfax, was it the same sort of culture?
No, sir.
No. So you're suggesting that there is something specific and special about the way News Corp behaves?
Yes, sir.
The language that you referred to, the behaviour of the pictorial editors, does that happen in other parts of the newsroom, do you think, or was it just specifically related to those sections that you directly reported to?
I'm speaking of not the picture editor, of the editor and the deputy editors and managers, not specifically.
So it is more general?
Yes, oh yes, sir. Senator.
And the role you play in a newspaper as a photojournalist is critical to readership. It's critical to the presentation of the news. Would you agree?
I believe so, yes.
You could make or break a story. Would that be true?
Of course, yes.
So the language that's used and the behaviour that actually is exhibited is absolutely critical to the culture of the news organisation.
My behaviour?
No,
Senator?
of those asking you to produce an image.
Yep.
I mean, that's what you do, isn't it? With
Yep.
the,
Yep.
the description you used is, pigs in lipstick, yummy mummy. That was the terms you used.
Yes.
Clearly, that was the terms that were sought. They were the news editor sought those, used that expression deliberately, presumably.
I don't think it was an accident, yes.
Yeah, it was not an accident.
No.
No.
Sorry, Senator, just to be clear, Ms. Rogers, they're not your terms.
No, I'm not
That is
suggesting
what
told
is what
me.
is told
Yes.
of you
Yeah,
and
no,
requested of you.
Yes.
No, I'm absolutely clear about that.
Yep.
What I'm trying to get to is that there was a deliberate effort being made by the news editor to produce that image for the newspaper, and you were asked to produce that photo op that reflected that intention.
Yes, so if we were told to go and get a weather, generic I'd say, a weather photo, and budget story, a family about something, it would always be an attractive woman, a cute kid, never an attractive man, but particularly attractive women were always emphasised.
And do you think that's more prevalent in regional newspapers? So, you mentioned Cairns, for instance. Or would you say there's a different culture in metropolitan mastheads?
No, I would say the Courier Mail is as bad and probably worse where I worked.
Would it be the same in regard to magazines?
I can't speak to that.
No.
Sorry.
But you are an observer of the media as a professional. In terms of advertising, do you see that sort of imagery?
I don't generally buy women's magazines, sorry, Senator.
No, fair enough. Would you say that this has changed with new people coming into the industry, new generation of photographers coming in? Do you think this is getting better or worse?
I don't think it's a direction that comes from the photographers, and I can only speak from my experience, but I believe if you asked any of the photographers at News Corp, you would hear the same story.
Yeah, that's my point. It goes to the question of culture.
Yes.
Not the question of training, not to the question, but it's the culture that you actually receive.
That's what I'm saying, yes.
In terms of the working environment.
Yes.
That's a product that you're being asked to produce.
Yeah.
What would happen if you complained about these matters?
Oh, you couldn't complain. There wasn't an environment at work where you could complain.
So there's no mechanism through the union, for instance?
I have never found the MEAA to be very helpful, except for possibly in the pursuit of my redundancy.
Did you raise the matter through the union?
No, I did not. I did make an effort on occasion to take photos of men in a sexist light to try and make the balance, and I was derided or made fun of for that, for taking a photo of a man exercising or so forth.
Look, given the public debate about the issues that around the questions of the culture of sexism and sexual violence, do you think the media plays a part in the creation or the furthering of attitudes in these areas?
Most definitely.
So when we talk about the role of the media in terms of fostering a democratic value, social values, do you think this actually contributes to negative social attitudes as well?
Yes, I do. I remember, ditch the witch. I've never heard a comparative thing against a male politician.
So what can we do about this? What can be done to address these issues?
I don't think that's up to me to answer, Senator.
No, but you're here to offer us advice. As a citizen of this country,
Yeah.
you've got a right to put a view to the Parliament. This is what this committee is. It's a representative of the Parliament. You've got a right to put a view. So do you have an opinion as to what can be done?
Could I take that question on notice and
Of
give it
course
some
you
proper
can.
consideration?
That's it.
Thank you so much.
Perhaps you'd like to consider what role we could take on in terms of recommendations that we make in terms of regulation, in terms of education, in terms of training, in terms of advice that we could provide to newspapers and to other media, because it's not just confined to surely this is not just confined to the printed aspects of the media, is it?
I can only speak of my experience,
No, again,
Senator.
But what's your observation? Are these questions that are confined just to newspapers?
I imagine if you turn on the television, Senator, there's not many fat or overweight, over 35 women on the television either.
And maybe it's advice we could tender to the union.
Possibly. I don't know.
Legal sanctions, is this an area do you think we could canvass? If you would take it on notice, think about what legal sanctions are available. So, yes, what sort of things can we do if we provide, in terms of recommendations the committee might be able to make, in your opinion?
Thank you, I will.
Would that be right?
Thank you. Yes,
Thank you. Yeah.
Thank you. Ms Rogers, you've outlined a number of quite serious issues. The representation and treatment of women within News Corp publications. You've talked about a culture within the workplace that continues that treatment of women internally as well as externally. You talk about a lack of support for journalists in when they're covering crises, whether it's bushfires or other events. You've talked about the influence of the clickbait culture, summed up by the email that you've presented to us in relation to the facts and figures of online subscriptions and coverage. I want to focus on the treatment of women for a moment. You've said that you were directed to get certain photographs of women to depict them in certain ways. Could you just explain to me what pigs in lipstick refers to?
I'm not sure. I mean, I'd be putting word... To me, it was, as I say, no one overweight, no one over 35, well-dressed. They had to have teeth. That's a big thing. It's North Queensland, so it was a directive to get attractive people to fit that met the standards of beauty, I guess, by the male hierarchy of News Corp that I understood after working there for so long. It's, it's sort of entrenched, really.
And did... were you ever directed in relation to taking photographs of or using photographs of women that perhaps the newspaper didn't like?
I don't know what you mean, sorry.
Well, there are sometimes we've heard from other evidence, of course, the depiction and the treatment of Julia Gillard when she was Prime Minister, and not just the news articles and the opinion pieces that were written about her, but the photographs that are used, the cartoons that are drawn, other women that the Murdoch press would report on. Were you ever, did you ever hear or were you ever directed in relation to the types of photographs that were taken of women that would sit alongside a critical news piece?
I'm not really sure. I'd have to take that on notice.
Yeah,
I'd have to give that some consideration if I could.
Yeah, that's fine.
Could I retract the thing about teeth? That's really nasty. I shouldn't have said that.
Just to be clear, though, this is the attitude and the expectation that you felt.
That I was told.
That you were told, not that you felt. Let's be clear about that.
They
That you
did
were
say
told.
no teeth. They had to have teeth, but it just sounds terrible when I say it.
Yes. No, I understand. In terms of how women were spoken about within the editorial conversations about what would be in the paper, what wouldn't be in the paper, what stories to cover or not, what was the general sense over your longevity working for News Corp in the way women were spoken about in the newsroom?
I think the journalists and photographers held women in respect, so it was a respectful position that we took. It was just the angle that was, it's hard to describe that, but it was just the angle we had to take rather than the way we spoke about them all. People would ogle over, if you had a photo of an attractive woman or she had particularly large breasts, it would get the attention of the male colleagues and there would be comments made and so forth.
And to be clear, you were never given directions to take certain photographs of particular looking men?
No.
In relation, I want to go to this issue of that you raise of lack of support for those working in the field. You mentioned bushfires. Could we expand on that a little bit? Is there counselling that's given after a traumatic event that you've had to cover? Was there training beforehand? Has there ever been any discussion with you about impacts of PTSD, for example?
There was no training provided for any covering of cyclones or bushfires. What I was speaking to was the male colleagues had got provided with boots and pants and jackets and so forth, but I wasn't provided with any.
Why was that?
I'm not sure.
Did you ask for them?
I think I was expected to use the men's equipment. There was one occasion when I was never off. I guess there was always, I don't know, counselling. I did seek counselling at one point where a photo was used on the front page of the paper, which created a huge backlash in the town, and we got abusive phone calls and 2 pages of letters just saying I was as bad as the murder and so forth. And I did seek the services of a psychologist after that, but I think that was the only time.
Okay. But in terms of just not even being provided with the appropriate equipment that would fit, that was appropriate for women, that just was never even thought of?
No. I was the only female photographer. You know, when I started there, I think there were 5 of us, and I don't know, it just wasn't on the
Did
agenda.
your male colleagues think that this was odd? Were they aware that you were treated differently?
I think they're aware, but you know, you can't go on and on and on. You know, I was there for years. You can't keep whinging about stuff.
The point that you make about when you returned to work and were taken from a grade 6 down to a 2A, did you ever raise that with your editors?
When I was offered the position, it was after many years of applying and never getting a foot in the door. I actually said to the editor at the time that it was a lower grade than when I'd started on the Oz in 1993, and this was, you know, after lots of experience. And he agreed that it was lower than his grade starting in Fairfax. He unfortunately then was made redundant when he was on paternity leave, and when his replacement came, because he promised me, you know, I'll give you an upgrade at the earliest convenience. So I did raise this with my editor in 2016, and she told me that my work wasn't good enough to be worthy of a pay rise. And I was very disappointed because I was a finalist in 3 major photo awards that year. You know, the Pampers, the Clarions, and the local awards. But she did say that I was upgraded from a 2A to a 3. But then when I investigated this with HR, she never actually forwarded that upgrade to the HR department. I've got, you know, a letter to that account. And I never received a pay rise, even though it was a double, you know, 2A, 2B and then a 3. So I was very disappointed. But yes, I did raise it. And because she told me, well, my work wasn't good enough, I felt so, I don't know, I didn't think I could raise it again with her.
And then when you finally left last year, the redundancy package had you classified as a clerical staff.
Yes.
When you'd been a photographer for over 20 years.
Yes, that's correct.
And do you believe that if you hadn't raised concern with that that would have been what you exited with?
I believe I would have had to employ a lawyer and take some action privately.
What is your sense of your colleagues? Would any of them be surprised at the types of evidence that you're putting to us today?
I don't believe so. I think the nature of the toxic workplace is that there has been such a high staff turnover. I think that's indicative in itself of the nature of the workplace. That you know, the fact that you end up with one woman in a team with 12 males. The women all left. We were brought to tears, you know, time and time again, derided and so forth. I think treated differently to the men, and they all left.
And that's a very significant shift from 50%
Yes.
women to...
I believe it has been improved slightly. I believe they have employed 2 more women since that. So there's 3 now out of the
3
15.
out of 15.
3 out of 15, yeah.
What role do you see this type of workplace culture, the representation of women playing in then the media's reporting of these broader issues? And we are in the midst of a national conversation right now about the treatment of women, the way we speak about the issues specific to women, the way we leaders respond to those issues. How does a newspaper report on that fairly if they have a toxic culture?
Yeah, I'm not sure. I don't know.
You think that's a problem?
I think that's definitely a problem, yes.
When you left, was there any opportunity for you to air any of these concerns about the way News Corp treats women?
No. I did make a short speech, but it was sort of limited to my career's moved from Marbo to Best Donut, but I sort of kept it quite short.
You talked about the clickbait and the subscription targets. Could we just expand on that a little bit?
So I did provide a document that set out, we were directed that it was a new initiative that everything we did had to be directed to either page views or subscriptions, and we were given a target, and we had to agree to that. I don't know if it is attached actually. Had some notes on it, and I felt that it was here, this one. This was my goals that I was told I had to agree to.
Yes.
So that was my subscription target. I explained to the editor that I didn't think it was possible because, and I thought it was unfair, because even if I came up with a story idea, took the photo, gave the journalist the contact number of the person, then that journalist would get, if someone subscribed or this journalist would get those page views and subscriptions, not me, even though I had initiated, and that would be the same for the male photographers as well. So I thought the whole system was very unfair, and I believe the subscription model has led to where journalists are pitted against each other. You know, it's like a Hunger Games of the newsroom now, where it'll be the last man standing who can get the most clicks, on the last newspaper standing, I guess. You know, things like on this last bit, I had to get 3 page ones and 3 back pages a week minimum. You know, there were 3 of us. The paper only comes out 6 times a week. You know, it's not possible for, you know. So they set us unachievable goals, and so the atmosphere in the newsroom was terrible after that, and I believe it's got worse.
And that type of specific targets for individual journalists, whether they be photographic journalists or news journalists, do you believe that takes a reductionist position for public interest journalism?
Oh, definitely. The union at the time did tell us we didn't have to agree to this, and I did refuse to agree to it, but I was threatened with disciplinary action by HR, and felt that my job was being threatened if I did not agree to the terms that were set out by the editor. But I just put in very vague terms, and she seemed to accept that, but at one point she was consulting with HR to see what could be done about me. for my refusal to accept the subscription targets.
What could be done about you?
Yeah.
How you could be managed or
What action could be
disciplined?
taken? Yes, what action could be taken?
Were you ever able to meet these targets?
No, never met these targets ever.
Was any of your colleagues able to meet these targets?
I think occasionally if there was a big breaking news story, yes, they may have met those targets. Yeah.
Is it surprising to you that as a journalist, you're asked to meet targets like this that sounds more like a sales rep type target than someone who's covering news and current affairs?
It's definitely new, and it may be it's not right. You know, it's not what I went into newspapers. I love newspapers. I've lived from the time I went to university and studied journalism. I've lived for newspapers, and I'm terribly sad to see it be reduced to this. Really, as are many of my colleagues too.
The email that you received from the general manager, which quotes, just to be clear, is this a man?
Yes, this is
Yes.
a man.
Where he quotes that he gets forensically analysed, not a spelling mistake. I mean, firstly, is that type of language used in official communication very often?
I was surprised.
What was the purpose of this email?
I don't know, and at the end, you'll note he says, in other words, thank you and maintain the rage. And I didn't know what that referred to either. So as I say, I was surprised at the email. I thought it was a surprising thing to put in writing.
Was this the general manager saying that he understands that the pressure to meet these targets is frustrating to you all, but
I
this is
can't
the
speak to what he wanted to say.
Okay. What I would was this target regime? Is this normal? Is this something that's across News Limited papers now? Is that your understanding? It's
That's my
not just the
understanding,
Cairns
yes.
Post?
Yes, that's my understanding. It's across all News Corp publications.
I might go to Senator Fawcett, and then we've got a few follow-ups from Senator Carr. Senator Fawcett.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I just wanted to very briefly touch on the issue of the disaster coverage that journalists do and the lack of support around trauma and post-traumatic stress. You may be aware there's a growing concern around that. Kate McMahon, for example, in 2016 published a paper through Swinburne University of Technology. There's been some people here in South Australia, one journalist in particular who's, I think, doing a PhD into that topic. In our terms of reference, we have a catch-all at the end of any related matters. And in a similar vein to Senator Carr, who indicated that this committee is an opportunity for members of the public to communicate to the Parliament, if there were measures that media organisations, and in particular your employer, could have taken that would have supported you better in terms of preparation for and support post-traumatic events, I'd invite you to consider putting something further in writing to the committee as to those sort of areas, because that may form part of what the committee may choose to publish in our recommendations.
I will do that. Thank you, Senator.
Thanks, Chair.
Thank you. Senator Carr.
A couple of things. Newspapers, news often says that it represents local communities.
Senator Carr, can I just interrupt you for one moment? We just need to check with the committee members that we're happy for photographers to be covering the photographer.
As long as he's kind.
Yes. No, I have
No one has any objections. Thank you. Go ahead.
So, is it your view that the Cairns Post, for instance, did accurately reflect its community in terms of the photographic images that you were asked to produce?
Could I take that on notice?
Yes.
Yes, thank you.
And secondly, were you asked to produce images in terms of ethnic communities, given the diversity of the population in North Queensland?
If it was an ethnic-specific story, then yes. But if it was a story about the budget, it was probably frowned upon to get someone who wasn't.
Okay. And finally, I noticed in the Advertiser on the 12th of March 2021, there's a Cairns photographer, Anne Rogers, shares her favourite pics. I take it that's you?
It's Anna.
Anna.
That's me, yes.
That's right?
Yes,
So
that's correct.
Anna, my apologies.
No, you're right.
Did you pick those photos?
Yes, I did.
Okay. Because there's some interesting photographs in those.
Oh, thank you, Senator. I'll take that as a
Thank you.
compliment.
Thank you very much. That's all. Thank you.
Ms Rogers, overall, you think News Corp has a toxic culture in relation to women?
Yes, I do.
And you believe that because of your own experience
Yes, I do.
and what you were asked to do as a journalist?
Yeah, as a photographer, yeah.
Do you think that this is that culture and the approach of how women are presented in these newspapers is different to how women are presented in other newspapers?
You mean the Fairfax papers? I think it probably is, yes.
This is an inquiry into media diversity. Do you believe that diversity is under threat when there are targets for subscription, types of stories, types of presentation? Do you think that that makes it harder and harder to ensure there is a diversity of news and public interest journalism?
Yes, I believe so.
You've taken quite a few questions on notice, and we appreciate that. And, you know, if you could give us some considered responses, that would be wonderful. I just wanted to ask one final question around the issue of bias. We've heard from Mr. Koch today, another former News Limited journalist who'd been at the organisation for a number of years, that he believes there is significant bias in the newspapers, political bias, bias towards different issues, groups within the community. You heard some of his testimony, but do you, from your experience, do you see that there is bias?
I do recall a particular incident with a state politician, and I came back with a photo of him. I think it was about AFL, a story about AFL, and the editor was cross because he didn't want the politician in the photo. And then he said, "Oh no, we'll run this one because he looks like an idiot." And I think that was one of the very few times that Labor politician actually appeared in the paper. I also think that, you know, the visits by Tony Abbott, by Scott Morrison, I'm pretty sure he came to visit, reinforced, you know, the angle that we were expected to take. So I'm
You
not
mean
sure if that's
visits
relevant.
to the newsroom?
Yes.
What would happen when the Prime Minister would come to the newsroom?
He would meet with the editor and the managing bosses.
And were you all told that he would, that the Prime Minister would be coming?
Yeah, and he'd come and speak to the newsroom and come and say hello and so forth.
And what was the expectation of of your colleagues and you as people who work in the newsroom if the Prime Minister came to visit?
I think it was probably pretty mixed, really.
Mr. Chair, sorry, can I just ask one follow-up question there?
Yes, Senator Fawcett.
Just for the sake of ballots were, in your recollection, their visits by members of other political parties who were ministers or at times the Prime Minister?
Not that I recall, but could I take that on notice, please?
Sure, thank you.
So the member for Leichhardt, one of your favourite pictures here is highlighted. But, I mean, do you think Warren Entsch got a different run from Labor candidates and the former member for Leichhardt, who was a Labor member, when during your period?
I'm trying to. Who was the? I've known Mr. Warren Entsch for a long time.
There's been the previous members.
When it started. Oh,
yes.
God.
So what? Just a question is: was there advice given to you about the way in which Conservative members of Parliament were to be treated?
It wasn't so much advice given to me, it was the coverage that they received, whether they would receive any coverage at all.
And did Labor candidates get different treatment?
It has depended in the years over with different editors, so it has really.
You were there
varied.
a long time. I mean,
but on different papers. I worked in Cairns on the Australian, the Courier Mail and the Cairns Post, so it really did vary depending on...
I'm thinking specifically about the situation in Cairns, given that Cairns is in a marginal seat. It attracts a lot of visiting politicians. Did you note the way that you might have taken a lot of photographs, but the way in which they were placed in the newspaper?
I'd like to take that on notice too.
Would you,
Sorry,
please?
Senator.
Thank you.
Ms Rogers, thank you so much for your evidence today, and we appreciate the frankness that you've responded to our questions with. We're very grateful that you've made the way.
Is it possible to make a couple of other points, or I've had my time?
I'm happy for you to make some other points.
Time to get back to us too.
Yes.
Yeah, there are a couple of things with the toxic workplace that I realised I hadn't had time to mention that I thought if I could bring up.
Yes,
just in
go
point
ahead.
form, could I do that? A colleague who returned from maternity leave was offered no flexibility with regard to her hours and consequently resigned. That's quite recently. There was unlimited overtime and toil with no pay or, told that if I didn't like my job, I could get a job at Macca's.
Who told you that?
My picture editor, the contract that we all had to sign gave the company the right to listen into our phone conversations, and you couldn't get a job with News Corp without signing that.
Is that still current?
Yes. I wasn't ever offered employment under the EBA. I was only ever offered employment under the contract. I know of employees on the award who weren't paid their entitlements or penalties. I know of cadets who weren't graded accordingly after the requisite time. So when I say high staff turnover, since 2015 we've had 53 staff leave our little office, 30 resigned, 19 have been made redundant, 3 sacked and 2 died. What else? They celebrated International Women's Day online by doing a female fashion spread with photos of 20 women wearing outfits. When the business editor was a male, he was a very senior position. When it was given to a female, she was in the same junior classification as myself. And that was about it.
Can I go back to this point about the phone conversations?
Yeah.
So just to be clear, if you would, this is a phone conversation, if you were on the phone in the office?
By any means, it says in our contract. Surveillance in the office and on your telephone by any means, I think it says.
Right. And that wouldn't just be for photographers, this is across the board?
That's correct.
So a journalist speaking to a confidential source would have their phone be able to be listened to by management?
They've agreed to that in their contract, I believe. Or I have to agree to my contract. I believe it's across the board.
So sources aren't actually protected at News Limited then?
I guess so. I think it says something about can be listened into. I'm not sure if it can be recorded, but the office is surveillance any means available. I'd have to take that on notice. Can I check my contract? Because
if you could check your contract, that would be very helpful.
Provide that section to us.
Sorry?
Can that be provided?
Of
that
course, yes,
that'd
Senator.
Be,
Yes, of course.
And that's covered under parliamentary privilege.
Yes, of course, Senator.
Yes.
Yep.
If you could provide that to us, that would
Yeah.
be helpful. The example in relation to maternity leave,
Yep.
you say that's quite recently,
Yes.
within the last 12 months?
Yes.
And so what has occurred there?
She resigned.
She
And could I
resigned.
make the point the editor is a female too? So it is quite disappointing to be, led by a female who's led the newsroom down this pathway as well.
Ms Rogers, thank you for your evidence.
Thank you very
much. We wait for your answers to questions on notice. If we can give you the date of the 26th of March, that would be helpful. If you need more time or you have it prior to that, be in contact with the Secretariat.
Thank you very
We really
much, Senators.
appreciate your evidence today. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ms Rogers.